I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Ernest Lawson, Bob Moses, Diane Nash, and others did. And he got that kind of, "Aw shucks, thank you very much." Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, "John, I'm here because of you." And on Inauguration Day in 2008, 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, "This is your day too." He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's fitting that the last time John and I shared a public forum was on Zoom. And I'm pretty sure neither he nor I set up the Zoom call because we didn't know how to work it. There's a virtual town hall with a gathering of young activists who had been helping to lead this summer's demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. And afterwards I spoke to John privately, and he could not have been prouder to see this new generation of activists standing up for freedom and equality. A new generation that was intent on voting and protecting the right to vote. In some cases, a new generation running for political office. And I told him, all those young people, John, of every race and every religion, from every background and gender and sexual orientation, John, those are your children. They learned from your example, even if they didn't always know it. They had understood through him what American citizenship requires, even if they'd only heard about his courage through the history books. By the thousands, faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, have taken our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King said that in the 1960s, and it came true again this summer. We see it outside our windows in big cities and rural towns, in men and women, young and old, straight Americans and LGBTQ Americans, blacks who long for equal treatment, and whites who can no longer accept freedom for themselves while witnessing the subjugation of their fellow Americans. We see it in everybody doing the hard work of overcoming complacency, of overcoming our own fears and our own prejudices, our own hatreds. You see it in people trying to be better, truer versions of ourselves. And that's what John Lewis teaches us. That's where real courage comes from. Not from turning on each other, but by turning towards one another. not by sowing hatred and division, but by spreading love and truth, not by avoiding our responsibilities to create a better America and a better world, but by embracing those responsibilities with joy and perseverance, and discovering that in our beloved community, we do not walk alone. What a gift John Lewis was. We are also lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless this gentle soul who pulled it closer to its promise. Thank you very much.
About what his predecessor said today. Barack Obama at the funeral for John Lewis as he was eulogizing him, where he had some pretty stinging attacks on President Trump and what he's been trying to say about mail-in ballots and about voting rights. He was really lashing into the president, and Trump did not get asked about that, which I thought was pretty notable because, you know, he was the only living president not to attend that funeral today. Bush spoke, President Obama spoke, and President Clinton spoke. Jimmy Carter was not there because he's not traveling for health reasons, but it was really striking to see President Trump not be at that funeral speaking next to those other presidents, and instead is here back at the White House and did not comment on John Lewis's funeral at all today.
Yeah, and John Harwood, it was the words of the former president, Barack Obama, at that funeral. He didn't mention the president by name, but it was clear who he was addressing those words to. At one point, saying, even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run to an election. It's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. They will get sick in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic if they have to go to polling stations and wait in line with a lot of people around there on Election Day, November 3rd. Potentially, it's very, very dangerous.
Well, there's no question about it. And the President Obama's words were incredibly stinging today. He invoked the specter of Bull Connor and George Wallace, who were racist figures who were involved on the wrong side of the civil rights movement, trying to stop integration, trying to stop voting rights, the violence against protesters then. And that has incredible weight at this moment because you have a president who's running a campaign of naked racism. He yesterday revoked a fair housing regulation and linked it, fair housing, that is racial integration, to crime and low-income people. He's tweeted out somebody saying white power. This is stuff that would be jolting even in John Lewis's era, but now it is incredibly out of step with where the American people are. And I think that's why it contributes to the president's sense of being beleaguered, because he's trying all these things. They're not working. They're not resonating with the American people. And I think he knows it. Also, on the negotiations with Congress, his language about the impasse shows that he understands that he's on the short side of public opinion in terms of getting aid to people, unemployment assistance and other assistance. He tried to contrast what he's doing with the crazy ideas of Democrats, but the reality is much of the Republican caucus doesn't want to do anything right now. The administration wants to do something, and the Democrats want to provide more help. They've got the leverage. Don't know how it's going to work out.
if I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence, is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. Lewis lived that history physically. It was written onto his body. In later years, he could point to scar lines on his head and say, this was from Selma. This was from Montgomery. Brett?
Steve Harrigan, live in Atlanta. Steve, thanks. Up next.
John Lewis was a walking rebuke to people who thought, well, we ain't there yet. We've been working a long time. Isn't it time to bag it? He kept moving.
Listen, John and I had our disagreements, of course. But in the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action.
His relationship with President Barack Obama was an important one. Like many black Americans, Lewis was in tears the night history was made and Obama was elected. In his eulogy, Obama pointed to this important moment, the bloody Sunday on this bridge in Alabama, when Lewis nearly lost his life at the hands of police while marching for voting rights. It was months later when the laws changed and many in his own family were able to vote for the first time.
This idea that any of us, ordinary people, a young kid from Troy, can stand up to the powers and principalities and say, no, this isn't right, this isn't true, this isn't just. We can do better. America was built by people like that. America was built by John Lewis's.
The former president argued that forces are still trying to suppress the vote today, right now, in November's election.
Even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
Outside, people watched and waved in the heat. Lewis was beloved and was buried tonight in an Atlanta cemetery founded by freed slaves who at the time had nowhere else to bury their dead with dignity. The final resting place for a man of so much purpose.
Lead me home.
And Steve Osunsami with us here in Atlanta tonight. And Steve, I know you have interviewed John Lewis along the way, and there were so many gathered outside the church here, as you know. One woman telling me in a word that he was humble, direct, and that he fought right until the very end.
Well, David, we are, of course, in his congressional district, and he was beloved, and not just by black residents, but by white residents, women, gays. In fact, his family made sure that as his body was being moved to the streets of Atlanta, that they passed through the heart of gay Atlanta. And it's all because he spent his entire life fighting for others. David?
Steve Osunsami leading us off tonight. Steve, thank you. And just hours before the service began, President Trump, who did not attend, did send out a tweet suggesting that Election Day be delayed. It set off a firestorm, even Republican leaders jumping in and quickly to try to put this to rest. Here's Terry Moran tonight on that.
No president has ever said anything like it, but President Trump, behind in the polls with a cratering economy and a pandemic out of control, tweeting today, with universal mail-in voting, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. Later, the president tried to explain what he meant.
Do I want to see a date change? No, but I don't want to see a crooked election. This election will be the most rigged election in history if that happens.
That's a flip-flop. In April, Trump said this.
I never even thought of changing the date of the election. Why would I do that? November 3rd. It's a good number. No, I look forward to that election.
Trump's statement today about delaying an American election was shot down immediately by Democrats and Republicans. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in an interview in Kentucky.
Never in the history of the country, through wars, depressions, and the Civil War, have we ever not had a federally scheduled election on time.
But Joe Biden has been warning for weeks Trump might try to use the pandemic to delay or delegitimize the election.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
And Terry Moran with us tonight. And Terry, I know amid all this talk about mail-in ballots and election security, that ABC News did reach out to election officials in all 50 states, Democrats and Republicans, about whether they're concerned about mail-in voting.
That's right, David. We've heard from 27 of those top election officials across the country, and not one of them, Republican or Democrat, has expressed any concern that mail-in voting would cause any significant fraud in their states.
In April, former Vice President Joe Biden predicted the president would try to move the election. The president's tweet came as John Lewis, a man who spent his life fighting for voting rights, was laid to rest. Democratic Representative James Clyburn, a longtime friend, called the president's suggestion of a delayed election the most despicable affront to Lewis's memory and legacy. Despite questioning the safety of holding an election during coronavirus, the president continues to push for schools to reopen, saying there isn't much risk to children.
The younger, the better. Amazing, the immune system. For children, the lower they are in age, the lower the risk.
The president was asked during that briefing tonight if, given the outbreaks of coronavirus in Major League Baseball, can he really assure people that schools will be safe? The president responded by saying, "Can you assure anybody of anything?" Nora.
Ben Tracy from the White House tonight. Thank you, Ben.
The former president, Barack Obama, as well as George W. Bush and former President Clinton eulogizing the late Congressman John Lewis. Take a listen to former President Obama at one point in that eulogy.
There are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
Now, Bill, it obviously was stirring, and it had a lot of progressive policies in this speech, and it was a tribute to John Lewis. But flipped around, had this happened on the Republican side of this kind of eulogy, I wonder what the reaction would have been.
No, we don't have to wonder. We know it would be a lot of, condemnation. I have to say, John Lewis did incredibly brave things early in his career, was a real champion. And as he's being laid to rest, there's been a lot of bipartisan support for him from conservatives and Republicans and respectful. And I have to say, I compare that to the reaction, at least that I saw on Twitter, to Herman Cain's death, which seems, some of it is so repellent, suggesting he deserved it. I mean, two extraordinary men who lived quite extraordinary lives. And it's just dispiriting to see that kind of difference.
Yeah, and the celebration of John Lewis's life over the past few days has been inspirational. Look,
when he decided to run for office, Lillian was his chief advisor, in on every major decision I made.
She got in there and became his best defender, his best ally, his best supporter, and would jump on people if they had critical things to say about John.
Lillian died in 2012 on New Year's Eve, 45 years to the day that she met her husband.
I think he's ready to go see Lillian again.
John and Lillian's first home was a small home here in Atlanta, and they never moved away. Tonight, they are reunited for eternity. We'll be right back. This portion of the CBS.
as I pass along.
He loved America until America learned how to love him back.
In the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action.
We got our last letter today on the pages of the New York Times. Keep moving. It is so fitting on the day of his service, he leaves us our marching orders. Keep moving.
It was a double rainbow over the casket. And for us, it was, we waved goodbye when he started to leave us. He was telling us, I'm home in heaven.
At an early age, we recognized the wrong under which we were forced to live, and we swore to God that by God's grace, we would do whatever God called us to do in order to put on the table of the nation's agenda. This must end. Black Lives Matter.
America was built by John Lewis's. Someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America. What a gift John Lewis was. We are also lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way.
John Lewis was truly a great, great American who made our country better. I think I speak for all of our viewers here in the U.S. and around the world. Our deepest, deepest condolences to his family and his friends. May he rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing.
Tonight, remembering the man who changed America. Congressman John Lewis, honored as a nonviolent warrior who fought for true peace. 3 former presidents there paying tribute to the man who crossed bridges and broke down barriers. Barack Obama calling him the founding father of a better America, a man who liberated all of us on the battlefield of justice. Plus, Lewis's own powerful message published today. Also tonight, backlash after President Trump floated potentially delaying the election. Many Republicans joining Democrats and pushing back on that. The president also reacting to the death of former presidential candidate Herman Cain, dying after being hospitalized with coronavirus for weeks. The important new details about kids and how they compare to adults when it comes to spreading the virus. The economic disaster, almost 1.5 million more Americans file for unemployment. Can Congress reach a deal to extend those enhanced benefits? The impact of COVID misinformation, how it's hurting the fight on the front lines. Against all odds, stricken by COVID, 2 double lung transplant survivors break their silence about their life-saving surgeries. And the NBA's rebound as the season finally resumes.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. The civil rights struggles of both history and today were the backdrop for a powerful send-off for Congressman and civil rights giant John Lewis. 4 former presidents paying tribute, 3 of them in the room as family, friends, and colleagues gathered in Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church to praise the man who nearly lost his life in the fight for voting rights. Barack Obama, whose presidency is a product of that legacy, today offered a spirited eulogy and a rebuke of those who may threaten those rights. Inside the Atlanta church where Martin Luther King Jr. once preached,
"He loved America until America learned how to love him back." We celebrate John Lewis.
a powerful send-off for a man who was right there with him, fighting for freedom.
Thank you, oh God, for this great man who lived among us, who now joins the great cloud of freedom fighters. Only what you do for Christ will last.
John Lewis, born in tiny segregated Troy, Alabama, the son of sharecroppers, celebrated today by presidents, including the first black president, who says he was elected standing on Lewis's shoulders.
On Inauguration Day in 2008, 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too.
Former President Obama, one of many today, calling to strengthen the Voting Rights Act that Lewis championed.
You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for.
And while not naming him, launching a forceful attack against President Trump.
George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators.
John Lewis's own words also echoing in that church. In the extraordinary essay he submitted to the New York Times just before his death, published this morning, his message to those marching now. While my time has come to an end, he wrote, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe.
It is so fitting on the day of his service, he leaves us our marching orders.
The tributes today, intensely personal.
When he could have been angry and determined to cancel his adversaries, he tried to get converts instead. He thought the open hand was better than the clenched fist. I just loved him. I always will. And I'm so grateful that he stayed true to form. He's gone up yonder and left us with marching orders. I suggest, since he's close enough to God to keep his eye on the sparrow and us, we salute, suit up, and march on.
Emotional.
The night that John passed. When this flag flew there, it said goodbye. It waved goodbye to John, our friend, our mentor, our colleague.
And candid.
Listen, John and I had our disagreements, of course. But in the America John Lewis fought for, and the America I believe in, differences of opinion are inevitable elements and evidence of democracy in action. We live in a better and nobler country today because of John Lewis.
I'm the master of my fate.
Including a tribute from a 12-year-old boy Lewis met at the anniversary of the Selma March.
John Lewis was my hero, my friend. Let's honor him by getting in good trouble.
He was willing to get in good trouble.
A celebration of that unbreakable spirit.
America was built by John Lewis's. And someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America.
John Lewis is being laid to rest alongside his wife of 44 years, Lillian.